Thank you for having me. I'm Kevin, founder of ETHGas. I'm going to talk about the future of yield and Blockspace markets. And so I put this together on my 34-hour flight. I realize I have like no logos in here, but just trust me, we work with other people. We're talking about like percent increases in yield, not just basis points. So for those who know us, we do Blockspace markets. I'll kind of get into some of the details, but I'm not looking at just like incremental changes in yield, but like substantial changes and what's the path to get there. And it's about thinking of Blockspace as a commodity, and I'll get into just like why we do it and the impact that it has. Now, Ethereum, of course, is worth, maybe not today, but about, it's sad. It's worth, we'll stick to the numbers, worth $500 billion, $500 billion. Now, how much is its block space worth? And to put this in context, you think about first like, well, how much is Ethereum worth without block space? And the answer is zero. 500 billion just wiped out if it has no block space. And all the assets on Ethereum as well, basically worth zero. And so how much is block space worth? In our perspective, block space is actually the single most valuable instrument anywhere across crypto. And yet there's no financial market, there's no tooling, there's nothing that people can really do with block space. And so our pledge is that basically, with everything that we do with block space, the goal is to increase validator yields. Now, I'll talk a little bit about what we call the macro block space markets. Most people are familiar with this. This is the MEV Boost or PBS pipeline. Basically, there's a bunch of people with order flow, everyday people, sophisticated players. They pass that order flow to block builders who then assemble blocks. These builders then compete and distribute the blocks through the relays, ultimately to a proposer or validator who will then propose the next block that goes on chain. Now, the futures market, we call that the spot market. So it's on the left. Spot market just means like now, what is happening like right now in every 12 seconds. The futures market, it extends, at least today, about 64 slots in advance. And so what you can do is you can basically buy blocks ahead of time up to 64 slots, which is about 12.8 minutes in advance. Now, what can you do with these blocks? So you could trade the block. Basically, I could buy an empty barrel of gas in some sense, and I can buy, sell, trade it just like it's a commodity. Secondly, I can build the block. This, of course, it's the physical pipeline for Ethereum, right? So I can take this block, I can build it, put whatever I want into that block, and the validator will propose that block, and that block will end up on chain. I could also take this block and strip it apart. I could break it into multiple pieces. I could say, I want to keep the top of the block, which generally confers the most value. I want to sell off the middle, maybe I'll keep the bottom, whatever. But the whole point is I can do stuff with the block, whatever I like. The fourth thing I can do is I could do nothing if I wanted. I could build an empty block, which sounds pretty boring, but that's where things get interesting. And so in the context of increasing yields to validators, there's this idea that what if I was able to buy multiple blocks or multiple sequential blocks? So in this case, if I were to buy 2 slots of blocks, generally, traders pay about a 27% premium for 2 consecutive blocks. If you're a validator with one of those blocks, you're going to make 27% more. And this is generally why larger validators are able to confer higher yields, one of the reasons, versus smaller independent validators. With 3 consecutive blocks, there's a 33% premium. On our network, we've seen a couple 4 consecutive blocks. We're not that large yet, but these are some of the dynamics that are coming out. So basically, the larger validators have some advantages, and the more validators that come on board into our network, the larger amount they get paid. Now, in terms of the economics around Blockspace, how do these trade? Is there a premium or a contango? Is there, is it an upward sloping curve? Or is it a discount, or is Blockspace cheaper? And it depends. For example, if there's like economic data coming out, Well, and nobody else knows for some reason, maybe you could buy it cheap and that block space will increase over time. But generally, it's purely market driven in terms of how this block space evolves or how it trades in the futures market. Now, how much is 12 minutes of Ethereum worth? And I like asking this question because it's a little mind-boggling to think that with the hundreds of billions of dollars on Ethereum, you could basically take control of the network for 5,000 bucks. Yeah, it costs around 5,000 bucks to acquire 12 minutes of Ethereum. Now, is this still working? Yeah. In practice, you know, no one's ever bought 12 minutes of Ethereum. This doesn't exist. But what happens is that actually, if you actually think of 12 minutes of Ethereum, it's actually like a straddle on the network in terms of having that control. Theoretically, it's basically like, as I said, a straddle or a strangle. You can actually look at all the assets on Ethereum, all the premiums, the depth of the market. Long story short, you could short vol on Deribit for the same amount of like notional liquidity and stuff, and you get about 40, 50,000. So basically, the vol markets imply a value about 10 times higher than what the spot markets imply. I just realized my time is short here. Anyway, we also take fees, all the secondary fees that trading that happen in our market, these pass on to validators. I'm just gonna move quickly because time's a bit short, but this is one of our operators with 9,000 keys. So they earn a few basis points over MEV Boost. We can chat about this later. We have a booth just outside. I'm gonna get moving on here, just in the essence of time. Micro block space markets, well, there's inclusion pre-confirmations, where this is where it all started, this space, a couple years ago. This is basically a slice of block space. Not that interesting in some sense. You know, who's gonna price them, who's gonna use them, and ooh, time is tight. Okay, second aspect is basically execution pre-comps, where you can buy a piece of block space, and that's included anywhere in the block. But the problem with execution pre-confirmations is that there's many people who want to do multiple different things. Some people want to buy all of Uniswap's block space or like an Oracle's block space, and that might overlap with some other MEV trader, and so it's hard to really build like composable markets with execution pre-confirmations. One of the most interesting ones, in my view, is the ability to do real-time sequencing. And so basically, if I could take a block in the future and actually break it into sequential slots, that's the coolest thing. Because then basically, Uniswap, for example, the price can update in real time, basically every 100 milliseconds or whatever it is, and you could trade multiple times within the block. But this doesn't really confer much value from an MEV perspective. You know, if more blocks gives you more MEV, smaller blocks gives you less, and so who would pay for this? Yeah, basically, it's contrasting the macro versus the micro side. And on the micro side, basically, if Ethereum is a real-time network, then basically the person or the people that make the most are the DEXs. So as you go from a 12-second network down to basically a second network, then a bunch of research, again, we can chat about it outside, we basically look at the amount of like toxic order flow and non-toxic order flow. Basically what happens is that you end up with like 3, 4, 5 times the amount of trading with a real-time network versus what it is today. As a result, all the LPs on the various DEXs, they end up making, you know, 3, 4, 5 times the amount of money. And so, again, we can chat about this outside later, but basically, as a real-time network, if you're an LP in a Uniswap pool, you'll get paid 3 times more. If it's an ETH pool, if it's an alt, you might get paid 20 times more as a real-time network. And so these DEXs have the largest incentive for a real-time network. And so Uniswap, their LPs earn about $1 billion annually. If those LPs' revenues increase 2, 3 times, they're gonna make $2.5 billion, which means they are willing to pay $2.4 billion for a real-time network. That money can go to validators, and that's 2% in execution layer rewards. And my big announcement is that we hit mainnet with blocks of 100 milliseconds 2 days ago. So the biggest network, Ethereum, it had 12-second block times. Now it has 100 millisecond block times. We have about 5% of the network on board with us. and there's nothing stopping us. There's nothing stopping Ethereum. So there we go. Oh yeah, it wasn't just regular faster blocks. We had some pre-confs in there as well. But yeah, Kevin from ETHGas, have a chat with me outside. We're just around the corner. Thanks, guys.